chapter 28. Going up to Wit, 1910's End of Trail. Reaching the destination. It was the end of the trail for them. Wit Springs became the largest settlement in southwestern Searcy County. The first settlers came to this mountain spring in 1817, which sits at about 1,900 feet elevation. From there, it seems that most destinations are downhill. It is accurate to say that you are going up to Wit's Springs, or as the locals would say, up to Wit. Both families of George Perry Ruff and W.A. Harness lived near the town. At an unknown date, W.A. Billy Harness moved his family down to the Creek Farm, where his mother, Jenny Harness, lived. Billy made many trips up and down the mountain as he held on to his mountain orchard farm and returned to farm the bottom land of Bear Creek. Upon the ridge above Bear Creek, Giles and Jody Turney worked their homestead where the soil was rather thin and lost its fertility quickly. Giles worked at farming and earning some money with the stave market that was slowly diminishing as the demand decreased for white oak barrels. More and more temperance groups were now calling for the outlawing of alcohol for consumption. Many cities and towns were beginning to go dry before a federal law would stop the manufacturing and sale of alcohol. It is estimated from 1900 until 1915 that the average adult drank about 2.5 gallons of pure alcohol a year. But by 1916, the average was 2 gallons a year. When white oak barrel demand fell, some lumberjacks turned to other timber demands. The railroad hauled logs out of the county for furniture markets elsewhere. Some trees were sawn into railroad ties and shipped out. Others cut eastern red cedar logs and hauled them to Gilbert to a mill. Lots of the cedar was floated down the Buffalo River to the mill at Gilbert, where a chain with hooks would snag the logs and put them ashore at the mill site. Many of the cedar logs were coming from the upper Buffalo region in Newton County. Logs were cut and stored along the banks of the river until it flooded, so that the current would carry them more quickly to market at the Eagle Pencil Mill in Gilbert. The last recorded saloon in Searcy County was in Gilbert. Unfortunately, the establishment was too close to the river's edge, and a flood in 1915 washed it away. Being close to the river made it handy for the river loggers who arrived to be paid for their shipments before traveling back upstream to do it again. The cedar logs were sawn into 2x2, put on rail cars, and shipped back east to be made into wonderful smelling pencils. The scented cedar made a fresh aroma when the pencil was sharpened. The process started around 1903 with the coming of the railroad, and lumberjacks were paid $1 a day to cut logs and stack them at the river's edge. When mules dragged the logs into the river, a river crew with a supply boat in front of the rafts of logs headed downstream. The flotilla of logs could take up to 22 days to float from Boxley to Gilbert. Bear Creek enters the Buffalo River at Gilbert, and I once floated from the Highway 65 bridge over Bear Creek with my brother Roger to fish it. A large pier from the railroad bridge crossing the river at Gilbert still stands in the water, made of solid concrete. The landmark is now a stalwart standing several feet tall, reminding of a past era when steam power once moved that region into the progressive era. In its day, the rail bridge was the only high-water crossing of the Buffalo River. Few that float the river today in their canoes know its story. Cedars still grow abundantly along the river and up Bear Creek. I speculate that the first settlement in Searcy County was called Lebanon, due to its massive cedars and the reference of the Bible about the cedars of Lebanon. While we are visiting the river town of Gilbert in northern Searcy County, there is another interesting story that takes place in the next era, but I will insert it here. In 1917, Gilbert's population more than doubled with the arrival of hundreds of Illini. The word Illinois is derived from this Native American word. The mining boom from World War I had brought an increase of miners to the northern part of Searcy County. Many of the newcomers from Illinois moved there as a cult, following a cult leader named John Adams Battenfield, 1876-1952. He was a quirky Adventist who believed the world would end by 1923. Battenfield was first ordained as a minister in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, but soon was led by patterns of sevens in the Bible to find new understandings of its secrets. He taught that the world would shortly end with a great worldwide war between Catholics and Protestants. He urged his followers to move with him to the remote mountain area of Gilbert to be self-sufficient and prepare for the coming Holocaust and subsequent millennial kingdom of God. Property was communally owned, and the church elders were the government of the cult. Members were required to learn Hebrew, the language of the incoming kingdom. In 1919, he began publishing a religious newspaper called the Incoming Kingdom Harbinger. 70 people moved to Gilbert and built a church house, schoolhouse, and a printing shop for the cult. They printed and mailed the newspaper nationwide from Gilbert and began mission outreaches to the nearby communities of Bruno, St. Joe, and Witts Springs. When the year of 1923 passed without the appearance of the Messiah and his kingdom, Battenfield's followers began to question his prophecies. Trying to hold them together, he made several attempts to bring a parishioner back to life after the girl was killed in an accident in 1925. John Adam Battenfield, due to his ordination in the Christian Church, was called a Campbellite by those who rejected his message. This term of derision was used by past generations of those who were of the Christian Church and the Churches of Christ after their founders, Thomas and Alexander Campbell. The denominations never referred to themselves by this name, but you might occasionally hear the term used by those who do not believe their teachings. John Battenfield suffered a nervous breakdown and moved back to Illinois. His followers disbanded and lost interest in his teachings, and the newspaper went out of print. Today, if you visit Gilbert, you will only see a smooth, cobbled riverstone building where the Incoming Kingdom Harbinger was once printed and mailed from the little Gilbert post office, which is still at the general store there near the banks of the Buffalo River. This story is not widely known by locals, but upon learning it, I must wonder if members of my family living at that time read the paper or talked with followers at their mission in Witts Springs. The old-timers, like Jenny Renfro Harness, who was approaching 90 years old in 1924, had seen so many changes in their lifetime. The progressive era of steam power and a world war must have caused many to wonder how much longer the world would last. With time, many others who have come and gone in the past have been revealed as false prophets, but much wisdom is to be gained from it. From the early 1800s until today, there are harbingers who seek to promote themselves as prophets who have knowledge of the end times. But this was predicted by Jesus and the apostles and calls for us to not be deceived by them. The small community of Gilbert is the only town inside the Buffalo National River Park. About 40-plus people make up its population. Its saloon, cedar pencil mill, and newspaper have disappeared, and it is known as the coldest spot in Arkansas. Often in the winter, the mercury drops lower there due to the cold air that settles on the river than any other weather station in the state. The next time you sharpen your pencil and notice that it has no aroma, maybe it will make you think of the good old days when children stood cranking the pencil sharpener and sniffed their pencils. Going down the tracks of the M&A Railroad to Leslie, besides all the cooperative mills in town nearby and the fertile bottoms of Wiley's Cove, were wonderful peach trees. The Alberta Fruit Orchard in Leslie had 500 trees in 1914. The Alberta peach was a favorite at the time with a yellow juicy flesh and a freestone. It was great eaten fresh, cooked, or canned. In 1913, a total of 7 train carloads of peaches were shipped from Searcy County. Packed in wooden boxes, the Albertas were firm when they ripened, making them great shippers for markets abroad. The orchards did not survive the Great Depression nor the new diseases that came. It was 3 decades before Marshall became a prime producer of strawberries. Reflection. In Bible times, the people always referred to going up to Jerusalem as it sat on a hill. Going up to Witt was also a steep climb from Bear Creek. Climbing mountains and descending into valleys had been a metaphor of the spiritual journey of God's people. Living in the hills has made the legacy of the Harness family richer as they viewed where they lived as being God's country. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but abides forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, from this time forth and forever. Psalm 125, 1, 2.